Hello and welcome to Healthy Living, where we explore important health topics to keep you informed and healthy. I am Aisha, Salihu. Today we're discussing blood infections and disorders. We'll delve into the causes, symptoms and treatments of these conditions and speak with an expert, hematologist, to get professional insights. Joining us today is Dr. Adai Ugochi, a hematologist. Welcome, Doctor. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Hello, good afternoon.
Now, before we delve into our discussion today, let's provide our viewers with some background information on blood infections and disorders. Blood infections or sepsis occur when harmful bacteria, viruses or fungi enter the bloodstream and spread throughout the body. This can lead to severe and life-threatening complications. While blood disorders, on the other hand, include a range of conditions that affect the blood's ability to function properly, such as anemia, hemophilia, and leukemia. Now, let's start with you, Doctor. Let us start with, say, blood infections. What would you say are the common causes and symptoms of particularly sepsis?
Okay, just like you rightly said, sepsis is usually defined in a layman's term as a life-threatening disorder, like you put it, where your immune system has this exaggerated response to infections, be it bacterial infections, viral infections, fungal infections. Usually the population which is susceptible to it are usually seen with the vulnerable population, the extreme, the young, the very old are susceptible to it. People who have had their immune systems immunocompromised with not enough, ability to fight off infection, overwhelming bacteremia or overwhelming infections. It gets to a point like when your body cannot fight off any longer, and then sets up a myriad of what we call immune response to help fight up your the diseases. Okay, you could also have patients who have superimposed infections. So most times you find it in patients who are vulnerable, like I said, patients who have already been immunocompromised. Patients, when I mean immunocompromised, patients who have diseases like HIV, diabetes, patients who have been on some drugs who have compromised your system, patients who have been sick maybe for a long time, in ICU patients. You find those are patients who are susceptible to sepsis.
But then what would you say are perhaps the common symptoms of the sepsis,
okay,
so one gets to know?
Usually there's a definition or there's a criteria. You find out there's usually fever, the white blood cell counts either high, very high, or very low white blood cell counts. So we have there's a criteria to use to define sepsis. So you have the fever, you have the white blood cell count. We also look out for things like measure the blood gas level, the lactic acid level. We also look out for the mental status of the patient, the blood glucose level. So putting all those criteria into place, and then we can define this patient as, being septic.
You stated earlier that there are the vulnerable population that are more exposed and more at risk to this sepsis, and you also stated it more like it kind of predisposes one, or it's a risk factor to another variety or sets of diseases. I'd like for you to put us in the right direction. Why do we have it more prevalent in these vulnerable population? I'm talking about the younger generation.
Because of their immune system. In the very young, their immune system isn't fully developed. They haven't encountered enough infection to develop antibodies to those infections. When I mean by antibodies, your body falls sick, your body remembers that this has happened before and protects itself. So when something like that happens later, whether it's a much more serious one or the same thing, your body remembers and tries to fight it off. In the very young, their immune system, which is what gives you the ability to develop those protection against these infections, isn't yet fully developed. So when something like that comes, it's overwhelming for the immune system to carry. And of course, in the elderly, the same thing. They are older and more prone, their immune system is already impaired. You should know that with age comes a myriad of complications. And with that also comes the vulnerability, and it opens them up also to infections.
Now let us look at it. Let us tailor it down now towards how do we really say this is sepsis? Say someone is having a septic shock or something. How do we really identify it? And is there something that there could be, say, somewhat first aid treatment for it, say there and then?
Okay. The reason why it's called life-threatening is because if intervention is not done fast, the patient will end up with end organ damages. Okay. So it has this ability to shut down the organs, and which is where the problem comes from. Renal failure sets in. Like I said, the mental acuity of the patient shuts down and all that. Like I said initially, we have this criteria because of how serious sepsis is. There's the score which is used. The latest one is called the SOFA score, where we use, we've narrowed it down to 3. You use the patient's mental status, the presence of fever, and we also do a test called the blood culture on the patient. So if you're able to identify that, and even if you have just 1 or 2 of that, those symptoms present, we term the patient as being septic. Now, the shock comes when we don't use shock anymore. What we do now is we call it systemic inflammatory reactive system. You know, these terminologies change. But what happens is that if not treated at that point, it begins to advance until patient ends up with end organ treatment. So once we're able to do the score, and we identify that this patient's score meets the criteria, you start to treat immediately.
Now, I'd like to know, you know, our focus here is on blood infections.
Yes.
I just want to know the variety of blood infections that there are and how they are typically treated.
That's putting it mildly, because they are diverse. Like you said, they are diverse. Like you said, you could have infections from bacteria, you could have from fungal, you could have from viral infections. So with the bacteria, you could have from the gram, there are so many of them classified into, there's a classifications. You have the gram negatives, the gram positives, and then you could have the bacilli, you have the cocci. But the thing is that for you to be able to classify them, thankfully there's what you call the blood culture. So for you to know this is what's causing the fever, because each and every one of these infections could actually elicit an inflammatory reaction or a septic reaction. You do your blood culture, it tells you what you're dealing with, and then you take it from there.
Now, recently there has been more advocacy for blood transfusion. Hospital banks are there, and then some of these blood banks are running out of blood, and there are calls for people to go on and transfuse and donate blood. I'd like to hear from you. What would you say should be more like the measures to be put in place whilst these blood transfusions go on? Because we know that some infections are also gotten from blood transfusions, especially the ones that are not done properly.
Okay, concerning blood transfusions, first off, you rightly said, like you said, we have a shortage of people donating, and that's because most of our donors are from friends and family.
Right.
The awareness in our environment on the need to donate blood isn't as due to cultural, you know, due to religious beliefs, isn't as widely accepted as we would like it to be. But all in all, it's also a life-saving measure. Now, with blood transfusion and infections, you usually get infections from blood transfusions when the blood is not adequately or properly stored the way it should be. And I could actually say for certain that most of the reactions from blood transfusion is usually not from from infections, because as far as I know, the blood storage system is especially in Nigeria, it's good. You store blood between 2 to 8 degrees. That's whole blood. Then, of course, the components, each component has the way it's stored. Most reactions we have actually are mostly from maybe immune reactions, but usually from infections, it's not as common as you may perceive it to be.
But then don't you think when this blood that you put in there for transfusion, don't you think when they're not properly screened, somehow they also perpetuate these infections that we're talking about? Because we have seen cases where people who go on to give their blood to other people, and the people receiving this blood come up with some diseases, like you said, maybe reaction or immune problem. I just want you to clarify that.
Okay, so we're talking about blood hemovigilance. Due to this problem that you said, over the years, we've developed, or rather the blood transfusion committees in different countries and even in Nigeria have developed what we call the hemovigilance, where blood from where it's from screening down to when it's donated, down to storage, to transportation, and even to delivery to these patients, each and every one of those processes are checkmated quite strictly. And then to more or less combat this problem, blood screening methods have become much more sensitive. I can tell you that National Blood Commission has advocated that screening of blood should be done with ELISA, which is a higher or a much more sensitive or specific way of, screening to actually rule out these infections that we may be talking about. I'm sure maybe we're narrowing down to maybe the HIVs, the hepatitis, and the syphilis and all whatnot. So extreme measures have been taken to combat that. So you don't get as much, or you rather the data concerning that is actually on the down low, because measures have been taken over the years for blood screening to go from the normal, screening test to the ELISA method, which is much more specific. So I think measures have actually been taken, and I know that apart from that, accreditation goes through, also monitoring teams go through to ensure that blood is actually stored the way it should be stored. Like I said, hemovigilance is a very important thing. So you cannot go to a blood bank and not have a good refrigerator where blood is stored at least between that 2 to 8 degrees for the whole blood, which is the commonest type which is given in our environment. And it's also, there's a strict assurance where the expiry date for blood, it doesn't supersede that expiry date. So blood donated, whether or not it's transfused between the required time, is discarded or used for other purposes that are not transfusion related.
Okay, thanks for your insight on that. Now, I'd like to hear your thoughts on this. You and I would agree that apart from water, blood is another liquid that is part of our body system.
Yes.
Now, I'd like to hear from you. How do you think we should take, would I say, proper care for this blood in our system now, just so we don't expose, we're not at the risk of exposing ourselves to infections?
I think the first thing first with Nigerians, which is something I think we don't do, is to take proper care of our diet.
Okay.
Yes, the blood is actually, production of blood, there are ways blood can be lost, or there's blood shortage. You can have decreased production, increased loss, or increased destruction. So the decreased production comes most times from our diet. And so you come down with some deficiencies which make it impossible or challenging for the marrow, which where blood is produced, to produce them for you. So the best thing to do is make sure that your diet is rich in iron-rich diet. Take a lot of vegetables and red meat also, and make sure that and also, yes, a lot of vegetables, a lot of red meat, things that could fortify your blood with iron, vitamin B12, and folic acid supplements. That's the first step to ensuring that you're healthy with the blood. And secondly, what we can do is for women, especially for the women with childbearing population, make sure that during antenatal care your routine drugs are taken, and also make sure that you register in a good place, so that you don't develop excess blood loss, especially during delivery, to get yourself into that blood shortage. So those are some of the measures that can be taken.
Okay, now I hear you on that. Let us now move on to blood disorders. Okay. I'd like to hear from you. Can you give us an overview of some common blood disorders and their effects on health?
Okay, I think apart from anemia, which we've just touched right now, so one of the commonest blood disorders we have, especially in this sub-Saharan area or Western area, is the sickle cell disorder. Others which are which are common, but maybe not widely known, like are the hemophilias, and of course, like you said, the leukemias, be it the chronic or the acute leukemias, multiple myelomas, the lymphomas, the Hodgkin's, the non-Hodgkin's lymphomas, the myelodysplastic syndromes. These are some of the common ones we see in our environment.
You have stated quite a number of them, and I can't help but say that I was lost at some point right there.
Okay.
But I'd like for us to take it, say, one by one, and also look at how they can be typically diagnosed and more so treated.
Okay, so let's start with the common ones in our environment. There's anemia is something that has been underrated. Most of us are walking around with anemia. Most people are anemic. Usually, symptoms of anemia differ. Anemia is defined as shortage of blood according to WHO standards, according to the range, the normal range you should have. Females have their ranges, males have their ranges. So, usually diagnosed when patients begin to experience extreme tiredness for no reason. They hear their heart beating, which is called palpitation. Sometimes difficulty in breathing, or you just get tired under mild exertion or things you used to do before, get tired. What you can do, like I said, is investigating first. You want to know what sort of anemia this patient has, and we do a lot of tests for that. You first do a full blood count. In fact, for almost all hematological disorders, like you said, blood disorders, the first thing we do is to get a complete blood count, which includes your PCV, your HB, the WBC count, that's your white blood cell count, your platelet count, and then the indices or the parameters. So looking at that, and of course your retic count, and you could throw in an ESR, that's an erythrocyte sedimentation rate. Looking at those pictures can give us a rough idea as to what sort of anemia this patient, and then narrow it onto the other specific tests or specialized tests that we can do for the patient. And so treatment for anemia includes identifying, like I said, identifying the cause, and then doing those specialized tests, and there's replacement of whatever elements that are missing in the body, mostly nutritional, but because it's going to take a long time, we have a way of, replacing it faster than expected, so that the patient can start to can replace what the depleted thing, what is lost, and then the marrow can now recover. Now, for sickle cell anemia, which is something that is quite predominant in our environment, it's a hereditary disorder.
Right.
When we say it's autosomal recessive, meaning that it's gotten from both the father and the mother who have traits. So an AS and AS come together, they have a 25% chance of having a patient who has a sickle cell anemia in each pregnancy. Not that 1 in 4 children will have it. It means that every time you're pregnant, there's a 25% chance that that child could turn out to be a sickle cell anemic patient. And it could be avoided. The first prevention is, if you know you're an AS and AS, do your genotypes before you fall in love, and then don't go for the, most times in our environment, we have the religious, we have the ethnic beliefs and all that, and then you go forward, because it's harder to bring a child in with that than to prevent it in the long run.
Right.
So managing it is identifying it. Most of them present in childhood. They come down a lot with shortage of blood. Sometimes especially in children, they come out with pains in the joints, little joints in the finger. They complain about. You could have them having swollen organs. So they have abdominal swelling with enlarged organs. And then you do the genotype test to find out patient is a sickle cell patient. There's been a lot of work, and there's been milestones in the management of sickle cell, ranging from the drugs which help ameliorate or damper or taper down the symptoms, down to even curative things like the stem cell therapy, the gene therapy, and gene editing, gene therapy, which has changed the course of sickle cell disease. Howbeit, and even some specific drugs called the monoclonal antibodies, which target this the gene and try to, you know, change it. Howbeit, these interventions are still quite expensive. And our mainstay in our environment is usually conservative management, where because these cells are breaking down. What happens with sickle cell is the normal cell takes like 100 days to break down, and before then your body has prepared itself, new ones has come. But with sickle cell disease, in less than 10 days, the cells break down, and patient isn't able, the people living with it are not able to bear it. The body is not able to bear the breakdown. There's shortage of oxygen getting to them, such a shortage of blood, and so they usually come down with anemia, and they come down with symptoms of the hemolysis. And of course, these cells that are breaking down tend to gather or in their joints, leading to joint pain and also myriad of symptoms. And in the long term, if left untreated, they usually come down with organ failure. So the mainstay of treatment in our environment is try as much as possible not to get them into, and this happens mostly when they are in situations where there's shortage of oxygen and the red blood cells cannot contain or cannot handle that. So we, as much as possible, keep them from such conditions. Ensure that they take a lot of water, they drink their folic acid, prevent things in our environment which could break them down or bring them prone to infection, or cases where there's oxygen shortage. Make sure that they are, you avoid cold environments as much as possible. Not restrict their exercise, so not too much of extreme activities and all that. Those things we do in our environment, we make sure that as much as possible. And if they come down with such their symptoms, you treat immediately. Pain is important to them because of the sickle cell and its effect on pain. Make sure that as much as possible you make them comfortable. Find which offending, what precipitants caused it for them. Handle it for them immediately. If the blood shortage is enough to be life-threatening, you make sure they get transfused as early as possible. Treat infections and then continue to manage them.
All right, that's quite an elaborate one for sickle cell anemia as a blood disorder. Now, I'd like to hear your thoughts on leukemia and hemophilia. Okay, so let's quickly talk about leukemias. Leukemias come in the acute or the chronic forms. And when you talk about acute, it means it's when we talk about leukemia, first of all, it means how do I put it? An accumulation of a particular cell line in the body. Okay. Especially the white blood cells. We're talking about, we usually narrow it down to the white blood cells. White blood cells could be lymphoid, like we say, or the neutrophil, could be the myeloid or the lymphoid lineage. So these white blood cells, when there's an overcrowding or an accumulation of them in excess from what the body is used to, and usually this accumulation or this excess are usually not okay. They're usually abnormal cells which accumulate in excess as to what the body is used to. We call it a leukemia. Now, acute for when it occurs usually in a short time, and usually with very immature ones. And chronic when it develops over a longer time, and usually the chronic ones are usually the mature ones which accumulate. Now, in our environments, people may be hearing it for the first time, but it's quite, it's seen. In the acute leukemias, if you talk about like I said, the acute lymphoid, or it's classified according to the lymphoid or the myeloid. So you could have the acute lymphoid, chronic lymphoid, acute myeloid, chronic myeloid leukemias. So for the acute lymphoid, usually you find it, you find it at all ages, but most times you see it in children. Okay. From the ages of we've had less than 1 year, yes, and to down to, and it's seen in adults. It could be seen in adults, but mostly we find it in the children or the young adults or teenagers. For the chronic lymphoid, we usually find it in the elderly. Then for the acute myeloid, it could be seen in any age. The same thing with the chronic myeloid. It should also be noted that any of these leukemias can be seen at every age. I'm just calling the predominant age group. Management for them is usually tailored according to what leukemias you have. For the acute lymphoid, whether it be acute or chronic, we use what we call chemotherapy drugs for them initially. So any patient who has leukemia will have to undergo chemotherapy, first of all. And now,
apart from the therapy, the chemotherapy, we also have, like I said, new drugs which have come out. So you have the monoclonal antibodies, you have targeted therapy. And of course, in cases where it meets the criteria, you also have stem cell transplants and even gene therapy for the management of leukemias.
Okay, I know that there are lots of other questions I'd love to hear from you, but it looks like we may have to have another episode to continue further conversation on this particular subject. And on that note, thank you so much, Dr. Ugochi, for sharing your expertise with us today on the program. And now, understanding blood infections and disorders is crucial for early detection and effective management. If you have any concerns about your blood health, don't hesitate to consult with a healthcare professional. And that concludes this week's episode of the program, Healthy Living on Trust Television. For comments, contributions, and suggestions, do well to follow and subscribe to all Trust TV social media handles. Download the Trust TV app on iOS and Android devices across your respective stores and get live updates on the YouTube live stream and the website. Join us next time as we continue to explore subjects crucial to your health and well-being. I am Aisha Salihu. Thank you so much for your time.